everyone. We're going to get started. Hi, if everyone could take their seats, we're going to get started. We have a panel literally from around the world with us on Zoom right now. And we want to make sure that everyone has time to speak and also we don't run into lunch. This panel is, I'm sure, a big draw for everyone in the room because we've assembled representatives from some of the hardest hit areas in the world in the cultural preservation wars to speak today. Most of our participants are in their native countries or at least out of the United States. Corine Wegener and I will be manning the fort here. And we won't sit up here during our colleagues' presentations because we want to see them as well. We're going to start with Professor Solange Ashby, who is professor in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Culture at UCLA. And I'm just going to give folks his titles so that you have some context for who they are when they speak. But full bios are, of course, available on the website, the registration website, and also there's QR codes in the back if you want to scan those to get all of the bios. Ömür Harmanşah is the director of the School of Art and Art History at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Roksolana Makar is with HEMO, which Patty talked about, a Ukrainian Heritage Monitoring Lab in Kyiv. Mohammed Fahim Rahimi is the former director of the Afghanistan National Museum and director of the Cultural Heritage of Afghanistan Conservation and Research Institute. Franco Arce is the founder and executive director of the Casa, and Samuel, I could be getting this wrong, Cajón Cultural Resource Center, a nonprofit center dedicated to cultural preservation of the music of the Mayan people in present-day Guatemala. And of course, Corine Wegener, who many of you know is the director of the Smithsonian's Cultural Rescue Initiative. So I'm going to pass it over to Solange, if we can get the screen. Probably give her full screen. Look, there we go.
All right. Hello, everyone. Can you hear and see me?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me start my 10-minute timer so I can be mindful of the other speakers coming behind me. So good morning. Thank you for inviting me to address your group. I'm happy to be here and speak about the situation in Sudan today. I like to include a map just to get folks oriented. So we're in Northeast Africa. Sudan is the modern nation where the ancient land of Nubia is located, and Sudan is immediately to the south of Egypt. So starting in December of 19th of 2018, massive crowds in the tens of thousands gathered in the capital city of Khartoum, capital of Sudan, to protest rising cost of bread, just general inflation, and widespread discontent with the 30-year military dictatorship of Omar al-Bashir. After about 4 months, this resulted in a successful revolution that toppled al-Bashir and led to the creation of a transitional military council wherein members of Sudan's military shared rulership of the country with representatives of this very large amorphous group of protesters who had gathered in the capital. Here's a scene from Khartoum of one of those massive protests that took place. The success of the revolution and the removal of al-Bashir led to widespread optimism in the country of Sudan. It was a rare moment of freedom and a gesture, a beginning towards democratic leadership in the country. A colleague of mine, an archaeologist, a Sudanese archaeologist in Sudan, Dr. Bashir, had this to say about the widespread excitement in Sudan. And so here's his quote on the screen. "This new interest in the ancient history of Sudan that we are seeing is the offspring of the revolution. People from all directions of Sudan unified themselves under one slogan, that this ancient civilization is the civilization of all of us. I mean, at the sit-in, you find this person is reading Quran, this person is drinking alcohol, this person has his hymns. There's a diversity. There is incredible diversity, but all are unified in the story of Tirhaka." Here is an image of the Kushite king Taharko, who ruled as part of the Napatan dynasty that formed Egypt's 25th dynasty in around 690 BCE. So this is a highly esteemed Kushite leader whom the varied ethnic groups in Sudan could recall as a cultural hero, part of their proud history. So I'll just point out that most of the cultural heritage sites that folks would be familiar with are located along the Nile, which of course flows from south to north. So from the highlands of Ethiopia and Uganda down through Sudan and into Egypt. I've circled the areas where the ancient Kushite monuments are located in capital cities such as Kerma, Napata, and Nuri, located in that top circled area, and then a capital city of Merowe, which is not too far north of the modern capital of Khartoum. I'll just show you some images of what is there. So this sacred site dedicated to the god Amun is called Jebel Barkal. It's located at that capital city of Napata at the Fourth Cataract. Here's a beautiful painted tomb of a king called Tanweta Mani, located at the oldest royal cemetery at the Fourth Cataract called El Kuru, not noted on this map. And then here is an image of some of the royal pyramids located at the capital city of Merowe further south. The Transitional Military Council lasted for just a couple of years. There was a lot of discord, untruths being told, stories to the protesters, which finally reinstated military rule when the military staged a coup on October 25th of 2021. Needless to say, the protesters were profoundly disappointed, but the military continued to rule as a unified bloc, if you will, for another year and a half or so before open civil war broke out between two factions of the military, the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, that had previously been known under the name of Janjaweed, militia groups that terrorized Darfur to the west of Sudan, and continue to do so today. So here is a map of Sudan as it stands right now, with Darfur highlighted in green in the western part of the nation. There's the capital city of Khartoum, located on the Nile. I'm pointing out the Nile. You can see its big S curve as it moves from the south part of the country to the north. And so here is Darfur, the three states that make up this region of Darfur in the west of Sudan. We think of it as just a site of genocide, military abuses, and horror, and it's almost impossible to find images of how incredibly gorgeous the landscape is, but I wanted to just share some images here to see this land in another light. I also want to acknowledge that part of Sudan's intangible cultural heritage is in the languages spoken by the people who live in Darfur. This is probably the homeland of one of the most important language families in Africa, the Nilo-Saharan language family. And the language of this ancient kingdom of Kush belongs to this language family. And so it is precious, intangible cultural heritage in addition to the people who are being threatened in this area of Darfur. So I'm taking my comments from a lecture that I recently watched online by the American Sudanese Archaeological Research Center, AMSARC, that happened recently on February 14th. You can see the title of the lecture at the bottom of my slide and the link to amsarc.org. But in this lecture, two Sudanese archaeologists talked about preserving the cultural heritage of Sudan. And the main points that they made in their online lecture, which I suggest or recommend for folks to have a look, is to create an emergency response plan. It would have been great if such a thing had been created before open warfare broke out, but these are suggestions for future protection of Sudan's cultural heritage. To designate relocation sites for antiquities, and Dr. Ahmed also renewed this call to relocate some of Sudan's antiquities to friendly host nations that might be able to provide safer places for this precious cultural heritage. Additionally, to accelerate documentation, ideally that would have been done prior to civil war breaking out. But it would be good to have a really detailed record of what is available in the country, what remains still to be protected. Dr. Ahmed also made the point that one of the biggest threats, of course, after this current civil war that's happening in Sudan, is the building of dams that has been happening for 65 years. In Sudan, of course, initially the high dam at Aswan, which flooded all of Lower Nubia, destroying any record that might remain of that ancient civilization. I'll just mention a couple other recently built dams, the Merowe Dam, which threatens those beautiful royal pyramids. A salvage campaign was undertaken between 2002 and 2009 to rescue as much as possible. I should note that the pyramids were not flooded, but the area in the vicinity of those royal pyramids. A dam on the upper Atbara River, which is to the east, a river coming down out of Ethiopia. There was a dam built on the southern Blue Nile, south of Khartoum, and in the area of Sabaloga at the Sixth Cataract, again in the vicinity of the pyramids at Merowe. So the war continues, despite the fact that it does not receive much coverage. It is, of course, in competition with the war in Ukraine and the atrocities in Gaza. But this article came out in the New York Times less than a week ago and documents the horrors that are happening very specifically in Darfur, where the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, is carrying out a genocidal program and continues to threaten the antiquities in Sudan. I just would like to ask us all to remember Sudan. The war continues there. And with that, I will finish. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Solange. Ömür, do you want to go next?
Yes, definitely. Let me share my screen real quick. Can you all see me and my screen? Yes? And you can hear me all great? Right. All right. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you for the opportunity to present in this important gathering. My name is Ömür Harmanşah. I'm director of the School of Art and Art History at the University of Illinois, Chicago. I'm also vice president for cultural heritage at the Archaeological Institute of America. I'm an architectural historian and a landscape archaeologist, and I've been directing Yalburt project on Hittite imperialism and its borderland, and the politics of ecology and land use in the Holocene and the Anthropocene in Turkey. In my fieldwork, I focus on cultural heritage, especially archaeological as well as architectural heritage, and in today's urban and rural landscapes under the governance of late capitalism. I was asked to provide an update on last year's earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and the efforts to preserve cultural heritage in that context. So I'd like to dedicate this presentation to my friend and archaeologist, Muzaffer Özçiriş, who was a passionate archaeologist, worked in this earthquake region for many, many years, really loved fieldwork, and we lost him during the February 6th earthquake in the city of Adıyaman. The two consecutive earthquakes struck southeastern Turkey and northern Syria on February 6th, 2023, followed by multiple aftershocks with a major one on February 20th. These series of earthquakes, a vast geographic zone along the East Anatolian Fault, stretching from the cities of Malatya to Antakya in Turkey and Aleppo and Idlib in Syria. The impacted urban areas in Turkey includes Antakya first and foremost, closest to the epicenter of the earthquake, and Maraş, and most severely damaged after that. Gaziantep, Adıyaman, Kahramanmaraş come to mind. Geologically speaking, this region represents a major left lateral strike slip fault zone, the East Anatolian fault line accommodating the interaction between the African plate and the north-moving Arabian plate, and the westward-moving Anatolian plate. This was actually an expected earthquake, which was documented by several reports ahead of time. More than 60,000 deaths have been reported in Turkey, while about 8,000 have been reported on the Syrian side. These numbers may in fact not represent reality, because the concrete debris from 6,000 or more collapsed apartment buildings were lifted without proper completion of forensic investigation. The building debris from collapsed apartment buildings were transported to sites and landscapes outside of the cities, including the Samandağ coastline and the Narlıca neighborhood valley basin near Antakya, both on the Orontes River. These sites have now literally turned into mass cemeteries for buildings and human victims of the earthquake. The scale of the devastation and the human tragedy is immense after one of the most disastrous earthquakes in the region's history. I prefer to call this earthquake an unnatural disaster, based on the conviction that in the 21st century, the earthquakes do not kill people, but specific architectural and environmental injustices do. I here refer to the specific history of late modern, post-industrial building technologies in the region that are reliant on 8 to 10-story tall apartment buildings that are built in reinforced concrete, and the way that urban communities of a certain economic class have been forced to live in this very specific building type. This has a kind of a really long history, a kind of a colonial history of introduction of architectural technologies in this region. You don't see this kind of housing in many parts of the world. Corrupt building industries of crony capitalism, extremely lax and negligent building codes, unchecked urban development adds to the complex picture of the earthquake as an unnatural disaster and as a site of environmental injustice. I'd like to offer you a glimpse of the extent destruction in some of the registered cultural heritage sites in these important cities. Reports describe the collapse of several severe damage or collapse in remarkable historic buildings and archaeological monuments, such as the Gaziantep's historic fortress, where a portion of the more recently restored stone walls have collapsed. This is by no means comprehensive. I'm just really giving you some highlights of the sort of historic structures, important historic structures that have come to everyone's attention. I'm including here the historic Habibi Nejar Mosque in Antakya, a very deeply rooted historic monument. The building itself goes back to the 13th century, probably preceded by a temple and series of churches. The Shirvani Mehmet Efendi Mosque in Gaziantep, as well. And the Antioch Greek Orthodox Church in Antakya. You can see some of the Christians returning to this important monument for prayers after the collapse. I'm sharing with you Shirvani Mehmet Efendi Mosque in Gaziantep, for example, another important stone building. This is an area of an incredible history of stone masonry and stone architecture, particularly Antakya, Gaziantep, Marash. Here is Malatya, and this is another city that was struck by the earthquake. This is Malatya's Teze or Yeni Mosque. The new mosque in Malatya. Here I am showing you the Araban city mosque. This is one of the sub-districts of smaller cities near Gaziantep. So the devastating outcome of the earthquake, another devastating outcome of the earthquake is the loss of historic center of Antakya, where the urban fabric of historic houses and neighborhoods are currently really under serious threat because there's concern about 600 registered historic buildings, about 1,300 unregistered historic buildings of historic value in Antakya's historic center. New legislation has been passed by the Turkish government on November 9th, 2023, on reserve areas leading to wide-scale dispossession in urban property and the preparing of the ground for new post-disaster urban development. The Turkish government assigned a team of heritage specialists to the area. The project was called Hatay Disaster Excavation Team, who have collected salvageable architectural pieces from the ruined public buildings and historic houses. It has been unclear how the collected architectural pieces are stored and how they're being studied. Other academic teams of architectural conservators have visited the area and written reports that have not been comprehensive or satisfactory. Heritage conservation efforts seem to have been curtailed by the fast-moving urban redevelopment efforts and debris removal processes that, in a way, kind of really reminds me of what we lived through in downtown Beirut after the civil war in Lebanon. Some of the area museums and their collections, such as the Archaeological Museum in Antakya, have been impacted due to the extensive damage to the architecture of the storage facilities in Antakya Museum. part of the storerooms of the museum and some of the artifacts on display, approximately 400 artifacts as far as I can figure out, have been transported to an off-site location to the central Anatolian city of Kırşehir and the museum in Kırşehir. The museum holds one of the largest mosaic collections in the Middle East, including a total of 3,000 works on display in the museum. Museum director Arce stated that some of the artifacts, such as Antakya sarcophagus, Arce steles, and other artifacts were in display, have also been moved to Kırşehir Museum. Heavier artifacts are secured in place and have been wrapped with geotextiles and itaform, and then surrounded by a light material, Roksolana, and protected in steel cage, as you can see here, particularly the famous statue of Şüpheli Numan II from Tel Tayinat, protected in its steel cage. The Archaeological Institute of America, for which I serve currently as Vice President for Cultural Heritage, has used its Nancy Wilkie emergency funds for heritage preservation to support 2 archaeological projects, one in Turkey, Tel Açana, and the other in Syria, Ain Dara Temple near Aleppo, which had been damaged during the earthquakes. I want to give a shout out to the Tel Açana project, which actually not only served sort of with their care for the damage that the archaeological remains have seen, but also for their integrated effort to bring archaeology students who have been studying in the area. There are a number of archaeology departments in the area who have been shut down. So this was a kind of a really great place for those archaeology students, undergraduate and graduate students, to come and take part in a meaningful project of recovery from the earthquake. I'd like to finish by saying that cultural heritage remains a major challenge globally as sites and landscapes of heritage and historic monuments, environments of memory and belonging, sacred places, museums and libraries, so dear to the hearts of world communities, are continuously threatened by war or these unnatural disasters or urban development or climate change, and the looting and trafficking of antiquities, as Patty has pointed out. Heavy responsibilities fall on the shoulders of archaeologists, lawyers, cultural heritage professionals, volunteers, and activists to protect cultural heritage in such precarious situations and geographies of vulnerability. And in the case of an earthquake, I want to say that we cannot just focus on this as a kind of a natural disaster and to recover, but also follow the situation in which the sort of proper and scientific procedures of care for cultural heritage is in place in the aftermath of these disasters, and this has to be done in collaboration with the local communities who do safeguard these sites of cultural heritage, who are important for them. So this kind of wild humanitarian interventions to save the lives of impacted communities takes precedence, for sure, over all efforts. Taking action to safeguard the cultural heritage cannot wait either. Thank you so much for your attention and for the time that you have given me.
Thank you so much. That was very informative. Roksolana?
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'll just share my screen. Do you see it?
Yeah.
Nice. So, hello, everyone again. Thank you for having me. My name is Roksolana Makar. I live in Kyiv, Ukraine. And for 1 year and a half now, I'm documenting damage to Ukrainian cultural heritage due to the war, which in February 24 had its 2 years anniversary. And the war in Ukraine itself marked 10 years in the 20th of February this year. So in my presentation, I will show you the results of our work we've done with Ukrainian Heritage Monitoring Lab, which Patty mentioned to you already, and I thank her for highlighting this. And I will even show the same map. And I'll just stop and explain some points of this map. So here you can see not the sites that are damaged in Ukraine, but those we have documented. So you can see that the southeastern Ukraine, which is under occupation, is not documented by us for obvious reasons. And also some sites in the central Ukraine, some like minor damage or collateral damage or some single monuments are not documented. But other than this, we have a pretty comprehensive picture on what's damaged in Ukraine. So I will point out Kharkiv. It's like northeastern part with more than 400 sites as of now. We have a local team who lives in the city under constant challenge, and they are documenting the cultural heritage loss almost every day. Then we have the south of Ukraine with Mykolaiv and Kherson region. And there we had a verification expedition joined with Ukrainian military. And it was dedicated namely to the loss caused by the explosion of the Kakhovka power plant dam, which caused enormous loss for civilian life in the south of Ukraine. Other than that, all the other regions I visited and documented personally with our team. So almost all the pictures that I will show you, I have visited on site. And I'll just reiterate on Kharkiv, which is a very important city for cultural heritage loss assessment right now, because it is very close to the Russian border, and it is under constant attack. And through 2 years of this full-scale invasion, we have seen how the tactics of the Russian military changes. So if the first year of the war, we had lots of artillery shelling and also aviation bombs. Right now, we can see constant ballistic missiles and drone attacks, which is like very common for the whole Ukraine. I mean drones, but specifically for Kharkiv. So we can see that the strategy of the Russian military shifted towards disrupting civilian life in ways to causing minor damage to lots of buildings. So only in the first week of 2024, there were 2 attacks that caused more than 100 sites being damaged due to the tight architectural fabric of the city, of course. And so we can see how the Russian military just disrupts civilian lives in certain areas and controls them. So now towards other cities, Odessa is also a very important city for us because the center of the city is a UNESCO protected area, and it was attacked in July. And 4 buildings were targeted with rockets. 3 of them were residential houses, and luckily there was little damage to the civilians, and a cathedral, which you are seeing on the picture. And as well as with Kharkiv, although only 4 rockets were launched, more than 50 sites were damaged due to the architectural fabric of the city. So lots of collateral damage is caused by 1 rocket. So I will just stop on this cathedral because, as you can see from the picture, it's relatively new. It was reconstructed in late 90s with very questionable architectural techniques, but I will be showing you this because it's a very striking example of the continuity of the destruction, because the original cathedral was destroyed by the Soviets in 1930s. And then in 1990s, the locals decided to rebuild it. And it was a very big crowdfunding event. So as the locals are saying, the whole city was crowdfunding for this cathedral. And although the results were questionable for architectural professionals, for example, the strike itself was a low blow for the locals who had this local story of the cathedral. Another attack, unfortunately, was in November 2023, where a rocket hit 50 meters approximately from the National Art Museum of Odessa. And as well as the previous attack, this attack has had no military reason at all, because no military targets, no military locations or bases or even personnel were seen in the close proximity. So here, the main building of the museum was damaged, and also residential building, which contained the library of this museum. Chernihiv, that was almost occupied, like Chernihiv region was under occupation in the first stage of the war, but the city itself was never captured, and but it suffered severe damage from aviation bombs and artillery shelling. Suffered another attack in this year. So in August, a rocket attacked the drama theater, which is, like, as we can see, is a common target for the Russian military. And this attack was a very peculiar pattern, because the rocket itself exploded not inside the building, but above the roof, causing a very big explosion of debris around the very big square around. So that caused almost 200 casualties, 7 dead, and all of them were civilians who were returning from the churches because it was a church holiday, and also enjoying just their day off. So it was like more of a terrorist attack, because like the building itself, it was damaged, but not critically. So you can see here like the upper floor, and you can see that it's damaged and the roof is destroyed, but the building itself has no like big structural damages. And this one is 2024. It was a New Year's Eve, actually. So that was a very surprising attack for Ukraine, because it was in Lviv, a city in Western Ukraine, which is like a large hub for everyone who comes to Ukraine right now. It's like residents from other countries. And they consider, but here a drone attack was conducted on Lviv, specifically. Okay, can you hear me? Because Zoom says my connection isn't stable.
Yeah, we can hear you. It's a little spotty, but keep going. Okay. So these drone attacks targeted 2 sites, which are very peculiar, because both of them are dedicated to the 20th century Ukrainian national liberation movement.
And both of these sites, as we can see from our documenting process, were likely intentionally targeted. So first one is completely destroyed. It's Harmanşah Heritage Museum. It was destroyed with 2 drones. So the first one hit the building itself, and then about 30 minutes later, the second drones hit the building. So when already the emergency services were working and other civilians just came to see what happened, and then the second drone hit. Luckily, the emergency services were warned by the air defense, and they gathered all the civilians and hit them, so no one suffered from this one. And another is the Lviv National Environmental University, which is a 19th century building that was a university from the beginning. And this one was the university when were one of Ukrainian historical figures Stepan Bandera used to study. So it was also hit by 2 drones consecutively. So we can see the similar pattern with 2 drones attacking a building. And the building itself is bigger, so the damage was not so drastic as for this very smallish house. But you can see that it's structural and will take lots of efforts to restore properly. So that was 2023 wrapped in cultural heritage during the war in Ukraine. And for more, you can visit our website where we publish our reports, our updates, and all the materials we are working on. And with that, I will thank you.
Thank you so much, Roksolana. That was very moving. I'm going to pause for a moment. Thank you, Samara. One second, Fahim, we're working on it. Roxana, could you stop sharing your screen? I think we're still, there we are. Fahim, thank you so much for your patience. Fahim, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Okay. I hope my connection is stable and you can hear me all the way until the end of the presentation. But thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk about the cultural heritage status of Afghanistan. And of course, hello to everyone. Let me just put my presentation. Yes, you can see also my presentation, yes?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. In my presentation, I'm going to talk more about the after 2021, when on 15th of August, you all know that Afghanistan Republic government was collapsed and the Taliban, which has fought with the coalition forces, but also against the government of Afghanistan, took over Kabul and all over Afghanistan, and they are still in power. So most of my points will be on after 2021. So because I have many slides, so I will move a little bit faster, and I hope I can manage the time. So you all know that Afghanistan is also a very historical country with located in between the Central Asia and South Asia, with a lot of archaeological sites and monuments. According to the latest satellite images survey of Afghanistan, there are 29,000 sites and monuments in Afghanistan. But unfortunately, most of these sites and monuments are in critical condition, and they have not been taken care, because you know that Afghanistan has been in war more than 4 decades, and there has never been an opportunity to work all over Afghanistan. So that's why I say that more than 80% of these monuments and sites need conservation. So, and of course, there is also lack of capacities and lack of a proper organizational structure to take care of these monuments. So, because there has never been a chance to develop as good as as most other countries that take care of their heritage. So, unfortunately, this transition also was somehow affected our cultural heritage and cultural heritage sector very badly, and most of the restoration projects that we had on historical monuments, excavations that we had in many of archaeological sites has halted. It's more because of the lack of budget, but also because of other problems. We right now also have a lot of problem with the land reclamation on the sites and borders of the monuments, because mostly people, especially who has power, take a part of the land which is related to historical monuments and sites and just use it for their own or benefits. And besides that, also, unfortunately, Afghanistan is in a country where we have a lot of natural hazards, including flood and earthquake and other things, which I will also show you some examples that recently happened in Afghanistan. So I talked about the restoration projects on the monuments and sites, which halted because of this transition. So I've listed here about 26 of these projects, which unfortunately halted, and they are abandoned, and nobody works there now. So this is, for instance, this is one of the monuments in the Faryab province. It's a madrasa, and because of this transition, the previous government contracted it, and the work has stopped in the middle, and it's nobody working on that. So this is the current status of that monument. But also, you all know that an earthquake occurred in Afghanistan on October 7, 2023. And unfortunately, there has been more than 2,000 people died, and also many villages completely vanished. And also, although there is not a proper survey of how many heritage has been damaged because of this earthquake, so there are only a few examples, which you can see here, the tower of the central mosque of Herat, which has been which is damaged because of this earthquake. And also there are a few other photos that came out in the social media in the citadel of Herat, and also there's another mosque that damaged. So these are some of examples of the damage because of this earthquake in 2023 on October. And there has been, because with all those, there has been some small emergency conservation and restoration projects going on in Afghanistan. And these are some of those, which are mainly supported by the international donors, thanks to the different institutions who still support the most urgent and emergency conservation projects in Afghanistan. And but unfortunately, there has been also a very many reports of the illegal excavations in Afghanistan, and sometimes even with the bulldozers. So very scary illegal excavation of the sites. Here you can see in this photo, a trench has been dug in front of the Bamiyan Buddhas. And according to the sources, I mean, there has been like people from outside Afghanistan actually doing that. And nobody knows, I mean, because nobody were allowed to go there. So nobody knows what has been looted there and what has been taken out. So this is only one example of it. But also like this, you can see here also another actually excavated site. It was excavated, I think, in 2005 by an Afghan French archaeologist in front of the Buddha. But unfortunately, just a few months ago, these photos were sent to me that it was completely destroyed and vanished by bulldozers, and you can see the traces of the machinery working there. So it was excavated site, but because they thought that there was something important, so they looted it and destroyed it. And just also a few days ago, there has been another report came out through the in news of Afghanistan, which unfortunately you can see here many of the sites, especially in the northern Afghanistan, that have been bulldozed and looted. And this started actually in 2018, so it was even with the previous government and continues until now. So unfortunately, and this is actually a new phenomena for the illegal excavations in Afghanistan, that a site is looted by the machinery. We have examples of course in the Middle East, but this is an example. We didn't have much example of that in Afghanistan before. So besides that, also you can see there is almost every day news of objects are confiscated or by security forces there, or customs and others, which the smugglers try to loot it. So this is one of the reports. You can see a few examples that have been confiscated in Kandahar airport. Somebody wanted to take it out. And this is also just the recent news, just a few days ago. A few objects was found in Samangan province. And also this is just recent, a couple of months ago from Bamyan, the objects that was given to the Department of Culture there that was looted. And this is a couple of days ago, an amount of objects was somebody wanted to smuggle it to Iran, and it was confiscated in Herat before crossing the border. So, and this is just a few days ago it happened. Well, I mean, there has been a lot also confiscated, which has been given to the National Museum, and this shows also that it's been on display. Some of those in the National Museum of Afghanistan. Just recently, they put it on display there. And there is also an example of return of an object from Malaysia. It happened, but it has a kind of like there has been a kind of political relation involved on that, so I'm not going to talk about it, but this is one example of the object that was returned also last year to Afghanistan. Of course, there are 41 known museums and collections in Afghanistan, but unfortunately, what is important is that most of these collections are not documented properly. And most of them are even not displayed, but they are just kept in storage rooms all across Afghanistan. Well, according to our estimation, there are only 41 known museums and collections. And if it's not documented, of course, it's also not conserved. So I would say that about 80% of these collections also need conservation. So only 4 of these collections have buildings like the National Museum of Afghanistan, National Archive, and National Gallery. They have building, but most of these other collections are not even having a building to be protected. So there's just only a room given to them, a room or 2, and they store the objects over there. And we have many archaeological objects because there has been a lot of looting happening in Afghanistan in the past decades. And so many has been confiscated, and there is also some ethnographical objects and modern art. I told you about the documentation. We have unfortunately a problem in this regard. So I will skip this slide. But I will come on our effort of documentation of the objects because this is very important. When I was in Afghanistan, I also worked in the National Museum. We knew that it's very important to document all these collections that we are having. We had this ability to do some documentation and conservation work in some of the museums. Like this one was a project that we implemented together with CER and SCRI here. Corey, we have here Corey kindly supported also Dr. Brian from UPenn. So it was a project that we did together, and we documented more than 3,000 objects. But it was just only half of the collection, and there is a lot to be documented more there in this museum. This was because also unfortunately this museum was damaged in 2014, and you can see that this place were it was bombed close to the museum, and most of the heritage objects this was on display was damaged. So this is only a few photos of that incident also. But this is 2014, so I'm not going to talk about this. Well, but after 15th of August, the only very important and very tragic incident that we had was the looting of the Bamiyan museums. There has been 3 collections in different storerooms in Bamiyan, but unfortunately, during 15th of August, we do not know who did it, but exactly the day that the previous government collapsed and the Taliban took over, these storage were looted. So you can see here the one they call Japanese built storage because there were collections that was collected by the Japanese archaeologists. So you see these are photos that have been taken by me after that, and unfortunately you see that it was looted very badly. And this is another storeroom, we call it Tarziya storage, which all the cupboards were emptied and all the objects were looted. And after that, we had a project which we collected the remaining pieces, but also documented what has remained. So we had 2 projects. One was with ICROM, supported by Aleph, and we documented the Tarziya storage. And before that, we had a workshop on that. And this is the photos that shows our work in the Tarziya storage. And this is also our work in the Japanese belt storage, so that the colleagues are documenting what has been remained there and collecting it. So, and you see here a few of the objects that was found there. We unfortunately, in local context or in Afghanistan, we did not have documentation of what was in these storage. Of course, the Japanese who did excavate or the Tarzi, they have it, but somehow the document was either not given to the National Museum or to Afghanistan, or somehow it is lost. So we do not know what was there. So these are some examples of the objects that we found there, very important, like pieces of the wall paintings, but also a lot of manuscripts from the 5th century CE. And you see, it's after what we did there. So the boxes loaded with the objects and also the crates and ready to be transferred. And we transferred it to a newly built facility that was built by UNESCO. Before that, we call it Bamiyan Cultural Center. So right now we are also working through an organization, we call it CHAKRI, or Cultural Heritage of Afghanistan Conservation and Research Institute. We are having some small projects, also a very important emergency conservation projects across Afghanistan. And we are trying to work together and also with the international community, but also with Afghanistan colleagues to document and to do most of the important things which is needed right now for Afghanistan. So with this, I also finish my presentation. I hope I did not take too much time. Thank you.
Feeling very bad that I put the fear of God into all of you in terms of the time limits, because I think we could listen to you all talk for forever. But thank you, Fahim. That was fascinating. And Samuel, are you? Great. Fahim, if you could just stop screen sharing and Samuel will take over. Thank you so much. And Samuel, just want to unmute yourself before you get started.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, okay. First of all, thank you very much for the kind invitation to participate and share the situation in this part of the globe. I was originally asked to speak about Guatemala, but since our operation covers a region, I would like to give you an overview of what's going on in Latin America and the Caribbean, which is the area that we work, on the subject of cultural property protection. So, let me get this slide going. Yeah, okay. So first of all, I would like to speak about the vulnerability of the region. And we have two major hazards or two major facts that have historically made us very vulnerable in history in the planet. We are part of the Ring of Fire. We are here in this sector of Central America and all Latin America, like Peru, Ecuador, Chile, are usually threatened by earthquakes and volcano eruptions and other hazards related to it. These quakes that we have every day. And also, especially Central America is nested upon three tectonic plates, the Cocos Plate, the North American Plate, and the Caribbean Plate, which are constantly moving by millimeters, but they cause all these quakes that we have. In Guatemala, for example, our seismology office reports almost like 200, 100 small quakes a day. So, I mean, people cannot feel them sometimes because we're used to it, but it is always, this is a very shaky area. So since we are celebrating the Blue Shield, the Hague Convention 70th anniversary, I would like to mention that we got engaged more seriously about the Blue Shield movement back in 2012 when Julian Armstrong, who was by then the president of Blue Shield International, came to Guatemala and motivated us to create our own national committee. So we got engaged with the authorities, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Culture, and a lot of important actors to start getting, some actions about the Hague Convention, and of course marking with the Blue Shield emblem our cultural heritage sites. Here we have the Presidential Palace, some archaeological sites, and many sites, here in Antigua, where I live, are marked with a Blue Shield emblem, although still a lot of work has to be done about socializing what it is, because the civil sector doesn't really understand that Blue Shield is the equivalent to the Red Cross. That's the easiest way. It's the Red Cross of culture. That's the easiest way that we present it. So in this part of the world, in Guatemala and Central America, we have worked very hard towards illicit traffic. We have heard in our previous presentations of how looting and illicit traffic can affect the cultural property of a country. And we have our own red list of objects that are vulnerable. So we work with, they provide, these red lists are made by ICOM, and in our case, it was sponsored by the Department of State from the US. And they are distributed among Interpol, and in the borders, customs, airports, and so on. Then we also work with the object ID. We suggest all the collectors and museums, churches, that have collections to use the object ID, which is a standard form for the Interpol to identify or to track illicit traffic. So I'm here in Antigua, Guatemala, UNESCO World Heritage Site, and just the name of the city tells the story. Antigua, Guatemala means the old Guatemala city, because after many earthquakes, it was moved to another valley due to all these earthquakes that have happened, throughout many years. Especially in 73, the city has to be moved to another area. So there had been a series of earthquakes. Probably the last one, very strong one, was around 1976. But we have had significant quakes in recent times, but not as bad as the ones in 76 or previous one in 1773, which basically destroyed the city. So another threat that we have in Antigua, Guatemala is that we are really close to volcanoes. We are nested among 3 volcanoes, and one is active, threatening, every day. We can see this volcano as part of our landscape, but this can cause very heavy damage. In 2018, 300 people died because of this landslide, this volcano eruption. This was a hotel and a golf resort. People, there was a lot of prevention plans, so people were evacuated. 300 people were there, but they were evacuated just 8 minutes before this happened, and that destroyed the complex. Antigua is also very rich in intangible cultural heritage, which is strengthened by all these hazards and modern ones by tourism, traffic, shopping centers and so on. Like I've been to Dubrovnik and Kator in the Balkans, and I see there are shopping malls, but protected shopping malls. I would say Antigua is becoming one of them, and that has an impact in our heritage, of course. So a lot of recovery has been done by the Protection Council. There is a conservation council that works very actively, and we're working very close with them to train them, to provide resources and knowledge about how to protect cultural property. And thanks to that council, the city is very well preserved after all these earthquakes, but we don't know, when the next one will be. So we have been training people with a methodology of ICROM, with a classic manual of first aid to cultural heritage in times of crisis, which we have used in many workshops around Central America. We have done capacity building in many countries. Theoretical and practical exercises are addressed by cultural institutions, personnel, the civil protection, the army also gets involved. We tell them, we try to cooperate with them on how to handle cultural property protection. In El Salvador, we also have done work with the museums. We are getting prepared, for any contingency. The Red Cross, the firemen are also trained on how to handle, how to rescue properly cultural property. Also in Panama with the National Library, we have conducted with the help of UNESCO. We work with partners like UNESCO who are very active in documentary heritage, in this case, protecting libraries and archives with their program, the Memory of the World program. And so professionals are being more prepared how to use these good practices to protect documentary heritage in this case. Not only paper, but also other supports like CDs, DVDs, which a lot of archives and libraries in Latin America have a lot of data still in DVDs, which is not good. So not a good media to preserve, but that's what we can afford. So we are encouraging them how to migrate to more sustainable supports. We work with the firemen, we train people how to be prepared, how to use fire extinguishers, the different types of fire extinguishers, and so on. So also in Ecuador, we have worked with the National Museum doing the same activities, practical and theoretical exercises. We just did with the SER, Cultural Emergency Response NGO. We just did a documentary heritage safeguarding in Quito, in Ecuador, with the National Archives, the historical archives of Ecuador. And basically, we are training more and more professionals every day. And in Peru, in Piura, the northern part of Peru, is where El Niño phenomenon really hits. So there's a lot of traditional knowledge there with the ancestors, the Incas, who also faced the Niño, centuries of years ago, but they have a philosophy and a way of making good practices of El Niño. And this was a model project run by children in Peru, which says El Niño, it's a phenomenon that brings opportunities. They think the Niño, because it brings a lot of rains, it's good for agriculture, it's good for fishing, for the crops. It's also good for developing other types of offices, agricultural activities, I would say, where they benefit. So this is according to their ancestors. They've been doing this with the help of the elder people of how to make the best of a natural phenomenon like El Niño. Blue Shield is also present in Peru. I can see the emblem in many different buildings. Although there is no committee like in many parts of Latin America. It's very hard to have national committees. And in this particular situation in San Martin, for the Irma and Maria hurricanes, we got some support from SCRI at Smithsonian to travel there to conduct a workshop together with the Blue Shield Netherlands and ICA, Carvica. There was people from ICA, Emily Leumas, who was training on property, on documentary heritage protection. So also with UNESCO during the COVID, we did a lot of, and ICROM also, during the COVID time, we did a lot of online webinars in the Caribbean to museums and galleries and so on. So risk assessment is also an activity that we conduct with the, in this particular case, in caves where we have Mayan petroglyphs. This was by quakes and bad management of the land. These are endangered. So we get this technical support from the civil protection agencies. And also risk assessment has been conducted. This is in the archives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of El Salvador, which are in really bad shape. And so we provide a lot of advice of good practices, post-disaster damage assessments after tropical storms, which are also agents of the damage in Latin America. Like sites have been destroyed or flooded, due to these tropical storms. Also, we had done some post-disaster damage assessment in San Vincent and the Grenadines after the eruptions of the Soufrière volcano a couple or 3 years ago. So we did this online. They had a lot of petroglyphs and glyphs, which was their heritage. And we have been getting help, partnership with the Cultural Heritage Monitoring Lab, which you have already met, Hayden, who have done some mapping at Copan in Honduras with the help of U.S. Army and the Honduras Army, who are working, joint projects to preserve cultural property. This is some mapping results we did in Antigua with the Cultural Heritage Monitoring Lab. And also in archaeological sites like Yaxha, we have conducted subaquatic risk and impact survey with the lab in the archaeological area of Guatemala. And also our center, Cultural Rescue Center, responds to emergencies when we can. This is the National Library of El Salvador, which was flooded by some problems in the toilet, but it really caused a lot of damage. And finally, we are also working with municipalities at a national level, because the problem sometimes, most of the times after our risk assessments are created by humans, deforestation, garbage, the bad use of water reservoirs and supplies. So that has given us the reflection. The nature is also being destroyed, the biosphere. So that has given us the reflection that we have to train communities, social volunteers, real people who are the ones who are there causing damage, but also they can be the first volunteers to protect. So we also have international activities like this Understanding Risk, which was funded by the World Bank, and CEPREDENAC is the network of civil protection agencies in Central America. So we're trying to get together at a regional level to include the cultural property protection subject into their agendas. This has also was done in the Caribbean with SEDEMA, which is the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Network. This was just before COVID, where we had 18 members of civil protection of the 18 different islands and 18 different members of the culture sector. So now they're opening their hub, SER hub in Curacao next week. So we have an office in Petén with the archaeological site. So our future and our vision, this is the last slide, is to work with the communities. We have this office, which also include, we are partnering with a clinic, so it can be humanitarian rescue, but also cultural rescue with a youth center that we're trying to train kids to raise awareness among children who are the future generations. They are the ones who we would like to invest, because we believe in the future. And I think we have to develop a culture of prevention and not a culture of reaction. So these are some of our partners. Our main partner is the Cultural Emergency Response, SER, who has sponsored our hub for the last 5 years in a way. And Blue Shield, ICROM, Methodology, the Heritage Lab, University of San Andrews, we also work. Iridium has provided some satellite funds. UNESCO, Smithsonian Cultural Rescue, ICOM, Starlink has facilitated also internet to us. And thank you very much. We are the ambulance of culture in Latin America.
Thank you so much, Samuel. That was wonderful. We now go to the live section of our program.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm conscious that I'm batting cleanup here, and we are a little bit over time. But I feel like I was asked to talk about U.S. efforts to protect cultural heritage in armed conflicts, and that's a pretty big topic for the about 5 minutes I think I have left. So, but what I would like to do is, I'm really grateful to some of the partners that have already spoken today, who've mentioned the support that they've received from the Smithsonian Cultural Rescue Initiative. By the way, I should have mentioned I'm also a board member of the U.S. Committee of the Blue Shield. So SCRI provides technical and financial support for a lot of these programs, and not just in armed conflict situations, but also naturally caused disasters. But today it's about armed conflict, and we provide both sort of technical and financial support. And with the technical, it could be as easy as, someone in Ukraine wanting to know how to pack a certain object or something like that. And we do that remotely working with our conservation staff, or it could be training. So we do a lot of training around the world. Some of the colleagues you heard from today have been through our leadership in times of crisis course and that type of training. We also do a heritage emergency response training domestically. So just look at our website if you want to maybe attend that sometime. But we have supported projects in a lot of places, like Fahim mentioned, Afghanistan. We have long-term projects. We didn't have any Iraqi colleagues speaking today, but we have long-term projects in Iraq, like training at the Iraqi Institute in Erbil. We're also working on the rehabilitation of the Mosul Cultural Museum after its damage by ISIS, and we're also working on the long-term rehabilitation of the archaeological site at Nimrud, and that's in collaboration with our colleagues at the Museum Conservation Institute at Smithsonian. We've been working in Ukraine since pretty much the beginning of the full-scale invasion and a couple of years ago, and we're working with the colleagues at HEMO, with Roksolana and her team, with HERI, the Heritage Emergency Response Initiative, on the ground, and with the Kosciuszko Polish-American Foundation, which is based here in New York, but also in Warsaw. And they've been helping us push a lot of cultural heritage supplies and equipment across the border into Ukraine. And also we've been working with the National Center for Restoration and Research in Ukraine, which is kind of their conservation group of the Ukrainian MKIP, the Ministry of Culture and Information. And then Sudan was front and center today, and we have one small project with the NCAM, the National Corporation for Archaeology and Museums, and that we did in partnership with Cultural Emergency Response in the Netherlands. And a lot of the things I just mentioned, we also are doing in partnership with SIR. I don't want to leave them out, but that we provided support for the evacuation of the Merowe Land Museum, which was mentioned. That area is very prone to flooding, and it also turned out that the area where the museum was actually sort of made into a military installation at a certain point. So they needed to evacuate that collection, and that's happened now. And then I think training is so important, and Samuel's presentation just now just goes to show how the more we have people who know how to react in an emergency, it's not unlike human first aid. You know, people who've been trained and understand what to do don't stand there to watch the patient bleed out. They have ideas about what they should do, and often they just need the financial support to make it happen. And so we're lucky to have worked with colleagues all around the world on doing that kind of training, and to have lots of partners in that training. And I think one of the important ones for the HEMO presentation you saw today is, along with Dr. Brian Daniels at University of Pennsylvania, SCRI, worked with a number of colleagues to create what we call forensic heritage documentation, a way of looking at damage to a cultural site that's not just looking at the objects that are damaged or missing, but also looking for the causes of that damage if there was criminal activity involved. And so we're excited to be working with colleagues in Ukraine on that. And then Roksolana and Patty also mentioned the mapping project. So working with the Cultural Heritage Monitoring Lab and the University of Maryland, the University of Pennsylvania, we've been looking at the issues of how you basically document through satellite imagery, and what you need to look at and how you need to keep that documentation in order for it to be available for future potential criminal prosecution. And then I just want to spend a couple of minutes, though, because I think it's not good if we always look at how the U.S. is doing things in other countries, right? We have a lot of work to do right here at home to better prepare our own cultural heritage for all types of disasters, including human and naturally caused. And that's part of how, we're here today to talk about the 1954 Hague Convention. And while the Hague Convention is a law of war treaty, it is also a cultural heritage treaty, and it talks specifically about preparing in times of peace for the possibility of war. And Patty mentioned how safeguarding is basically kind of what you do that's a positive thing, things that you're supposed to do in that preparation for armed conflict. So any of you here today that are involved with a cultural heritage institution where your job is to take care of that and preserve that cultural heritage are actually fulfilling some of our national obligations to implement the 1954 Hague Convention, because preparing in times of peace means, do you have an emergency plan? Have you trained your staff to carry out that emergency plan, et cetera? And so this leads to, how's the U.S. implementing the Hague Convention today? And I'm really pleased to say that I think we've come a long way since our ratification 15 years ago. And as part of the duties of the Cultural Heritage Coordinating Committee, which is chaired by the Department of State, but it's interagency. It has 12 agencies, and that includes the Smithsonian, and we're not really an agency, I'll just say that. But that's a since we don't have a Ministry of Culture, that's the touch point for the coordination of the interagency. And more have been concerned with issues of treaty obligations of the United States, of these UNESCO administered treaties, including 54 Hague. And so just a couple of years ago, we actually submitted our first quadrennial report to UNESCO on the implementation of Hague. And it was a very much joint effort, with Blue Shield joining in to help write, the DoD writing their portion of it, the Department of Interior talking about how we prepare in times of peace, and us conglomerating this all together and being submitted by the International Treaty Office at the State Department. I think that's pretty good coordination, and I think we made a pretty good case for our implementation. But one of the strongest things that I think we can say about our report and our implementation is what Patty mentioned earlier, the military responsibilities under the 1954 Hague Convention, and the resurgence, whatever you want to call it, of the Monuments Officer program for the U.S. Army. And I think it's important for a number of reasons. We've had the doctrine since 1943, essentially, when the Civil Affairs Division of Military Governance was created during World War II, and the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives teams were stood up. We've had that doctrine within U.S. Army Civil Affairs for that whole time, but we let it wane very badly in the inter years, and to the point where when I was a serving civil affairs officer in Iraq, it was me and another guy who had the training to kind of take on that task of helping the Iraq Museum after it was looted. And sort of in 2014, looking back at the lessons learned or lessons identified from Iraq, the U.S. Army made a determination that they really needed to do better at military governance broadly, but in particular, looking at the monuments officers. And I want to introduce here today, he already kind of introduced himself, Colonel Scott DeJesse, who heads the program, the entire military government program of what we call 38 Golf. These are governance specialists, hence the G after the 38 for governance. And but in particular, he's a 6 Victor, which are the heritage and preservation officers of the 38 Golf program. And Colonel DeJesse has done a great deal since the Army decided clear back in 2014 that they needed to revitalize this program. They needed to professionalize it by creating a really strict standard, and everybody has to go before a board and become board certified. And then in 2019 or 2018, we created an MOU between the Smithsonian and the U.S. Army on how to standardize training for these monuments officers. And I'll just say really quickly that the professionalization of the program and the board certification means that everyone has to have a minimum of a master's degree in their area of expertise and 4 years of professional full-time experience working in the field. And so that means that we have a variety of cultural professionals within the force, all in the Army Reserve, and that then the task is to get them to train together on a number of things like emergency response for cultural heritage. It's not something everybody trains on in grad school, right? I know I didn't in my art history program. And so these are the kinds of things they do together, but even more importantly, they're training with their counterparts internationally. We've had 2 live trainings for the AMOT, Army Monuments Officer Training in Washington, and we've had our colleagues from the UK, from France, from a number of other countries, and including last year from Ukraine, because Ukraine is now starting their Monuments Officer program. So it's very exciting, and I think it really, this gets back to what is the U.S. doing to strengthen the protection of cultural heritage and armed conflicts? And it starts at home, and having a cadre of now, I think, more than 40 officers, 40 monuments officers, whereas back, in 2003, we had 2. It's really exciting. And they're training with their counterparts around the world. And this is really providing a much stepped up effort at protecting cultural heritage around the world. So thanks. So I think we have some questions, or are we going to have questions, Pippa? And before I sign off, though, I want to remind everybody that the U.S. Committee of the Blue Shield is providing lunches. And so I think we're hoping we'll gather back in this room with our lunches, or do we know, Pippa, where they can eat? Can they eat them in here?
Well, maybe the committee on maybe the committee, if you're concerned about the committee, you can come in here. There's space across the way, and there's space on the first floor designated for lunch with round tables.
Okay. And if you want to join the Army and become a monuments officer, please see Colonel DeJessen. Thanks.
Oh, sorry, I had a question for Corine.
We actually do not have round tables here, but that's for the lunch.
Hi.
So somebody said
Hi,
they had
yes,
questions.
I have a question right here to your right. You mentioned
sorry,
this
it's really
big
hard to see.
report that a bunch of departments put together. Is that publicly available online?
Yeah, it's on the UNESCO Hague Convention portal, I believe, but I can't give you a URL for that. Sorry. All the nations who do the reporting, you can find it on the UNESCO's website.
Barbara?
Yes, I was just wondering what your budget is, and how that compares with other countries' work, and whether you're the sole museum as public and that's doing that here.
So I guess that was directed at me, Corine Wegener. No, we're certainly not the only museum. I just knew I didn't have time to talk about my museum and every other museum. So I know the Getty has been involved. The Metropolitan Museum of Art has been involved. In fact, we've gone on missions with them to other countries to provide, conservation, technical support. Other organizations like the World Monuments Fund, they're our partners on a lot of different projects. We're working on the Mosul Cultural Museum renovation together. So there are a number of U.S. organizations involved. The State Department provides a lot of funding for a lot of different organizations, but we have funding for SCRI. We have funding from the Bank of America, the Mellon Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation provided a lot of funding for our Ukraine projects. So we were able to take both private and public, but how it compares with other countries, I'm not really sure. Right. And yeah, as Patty just pointed out, we don't have a unified Ministry of Culture, and in a lot of other countries, like for instance, the Netherlands, both their foreign ministry and their Ministry of Culture provide funding for international response projects.
Anyone else? I have a couple questions from online, which might spur some interesting discussion. One is, and I open this to all the participants, is will any of the techniques developed in Ukraine, Iraq, Afghanistan, and I'll add in America and other nations be employed to track and address cultural property damage in Gaza?
I guess that leaves me too. I believe they will, and it won't necessarily. I mean, it remains to be seen, right? We're in that phase of we have what a colleague of mine called bleeding issues, but there is a lot of damage to cultural heritage sites in Gaza, and I do believe there will be an international response for that when the time is right.
That leads to a question I had that came up in a number of the presentations, and that is the balance between the devastation that is in a country, whether it's from a disaster, a war, whatever, versus the protection and rehabilitation of cultural heritage sites. And I'm wondering how our participants who are working in the field handle that. It must be very difficult how they work with their governments for funding at a time when money is clearly an issue. Can they hear me? Okay.
If Roksolana is still on, oh, there she is.
I am, yes. Hi. So, in terms of rain, so the question is about the balance of renovation, yeah, and if I understood correctly.
That, yeah.
I think it's, Roksolana, the fact that it's an active conflict where you still have, people are being killed, et cetera, and then trying to do cultural heritage. And I think that your team is very able to strike a good balance on that.
Well, yes, thanks to also our international partners who use our documenting to restoration projects. So we have several success cases of restoration ongoing. But as you said, it's an ongoing conflict. So it's really hard to advocate for some renovation works right now because you always are scared of second targeting or second attack. So it depends on the region really, because Ukraine is a fairly big country in European standards. So if we are talking about more peaceful regions that are not directly near the front line or not occupied and so on. So the restoration works there are more active, although we always should advocate for the correct restoration and the correct way, the professional way to restore these architectural sites. And the regions that are closer to the front line are not so willing to do the restoration project because there is also always a chance that there will be the second targeting.
Okay. Okay. I can't. It's hard to. Yeah. So Solange.
Hi, I just wanted to chime in about Sudan, which is also in an active state of war, civil war in this case. So much so that I can't even show slides about what sort of state the cultural heritage is in. No one is able to get that information, although we have seen online pictures of the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, inside of Khartoum's National Archaeological Museum, rifling through cultural heritage items. And so Sudan is in a somewhat different position than Ukraine because it has just recently been removed from the terrorist state designation, which we're seeing in full effect of the army turning on its own people. It feels like Sudan is needing to raise funds through non-governmental organization. I am not aware of active American governmental support to protect cultural heritage there. And that is really a shame because it is ancient and precious cultural heritage. So I'm just making a plea before this body and the people assembled here that we should very much be involved in protecting that heritage. And to the question in the Q&A, looking to a post-conflict plan for how we can be involved in safeguarding, protecting, renovating the destruction that is certainly occurring right now as we speak.
That takes care of one of the questions. I think we're going to wrap up. We're a little over, but there was one question from an attendee for Fahim. Does the current Taliban government take any responsibility to preserve and protect any religious sites?
Yes. Apparently, there has been. They have a few months ago, their supreme leader have released a decree for their local commanders and also for in general for their soldiers to protect the archaeological sites and monuments or any archaeological valued heritage, or historical valued heritage, so that it's been they should take care of it. They take care of it, and there is the museum, National Museum, open for the public, and also some other museums opened for the public. National Archive is open, so they take responsibility and they protect it. And but unfortunately, sometimes it happens that during the especially in the provinces where there are a lot of local commanders, actually they do not obey that much of the decrees or anything that is announced from their government inside from Kabul. So that's why we see the examples of some of the sites have been looted, and it happens during that they have control of all over Afghanistan. And so yeah, sometimes it happens that they do not care and they just loot but sometimes but for most of the cases they take care of the sites and protect it. So we have some actually Jewish heritage as well in Herat, let's say, and right now there are a couple of projects actually specifically preserving these Jewish heritage. Probably people do not talk about it a lot, but it's happening and it's supported by the international organizations financially. And there are some local NGOs actually doing a preservation work in those Jewish synagogues. And we do not have much of the Christian heritage in Afghanistan, but of course the Buddhist sites also. So far, until now, it's protected, so there has not been any kind of deliberate distraction happening to those sites as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's wonderful. I want to thank all our panelists. This was fantastic. We're going to break for lunch. We have an hour, so we'll see you back here at 1:30. If you're interested in talking to the folks from the Blue Shield, they will be in the room here. And as I say, we have an overflow room across the way. There's also other classrooms in the building. So if you have any questions, please ask a student or one of us. Thank you.